of you who are still in school right now, like I'm pretty sure life must be super busy right now. So thank you for taking your time out of your schedule to like come to our workshop, and hopefully we'll be able to you'll be able to get what you want to learn out of our workshop today. So just a little bit of introduction. So my name is Jimbo Yu, and I'm the Skule Photography Director at the Engineering Society this year. And yeah, Wumi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi. My name is Umi, and I'm from the Humans of Skule Club. And hello, nice to meet you. I'm a Chem 2T3. So, all right. Okay, please go on.
All right. Yeah. So today we're gonna like we've talked about in our social media posts, we're gonna talk about portrait photography and event photography, and some of the post editing strategies that you can apply to your photos when you're going through your photos at the end. And I would just like to set the record straight at the beginning of our workshop. So when it comes to post editing, first of all, photography is a very subjective topic, and post editing is also in some ways it's even more subjective. So today all the stuff that we're going to talk about are things that we've done in the past that have worked well for like both of us. You might disagree, or you might have different takes, or you might have better ideas. um, you can definitely ask us questions. For example, why do you do that? Like, is there a better way to do it? Like, we would absolutely appreciate it. So yeah, so that's just a little bit of disclaimer to begin with at the beginning of our workshop. All right, so in terms of like the structure of today's workshop, we're mostly gonna talk about three main subtopics, I guess. So first of all, we're gonna talk about some of the very basic photo editing terms, like what exposure is, what contrast is, what is white balance, temperature, that kind of thing. Just we don't expect everyone to come in with a lot of knowledge about photography and post editing. So yeah, so we thought it would be ideal for everybody to just do like a review on some of these terms if you already know these terms. And we're going to talk about some of our workflows, like I said, our personal routines when it comes to editing photos. Umi will focus a bit more on portrait photography because that's her forte, and then I will be focusing a lot more on event photography because that's what I do most of the time at UT Engineering. And we will at the end we'll talk about some of our own tips and editing strategies. And yeah, let's get started. So Umi, would you like to kick off?
Yeah. So in terms of basic editing, we're gonna cover light, color, details, cropping, and retouching. So first of all, lighting. Could you switch to the next slide? RGB curves are one of the most important part when it comes to adjusting lighting in your photos. So as you can see, there are 4 curves. The light curve, the red curve, the green, and the blue curves. A diagonal line between the bottom left corner and the top right corner is the line that you adjust to alter the tone of your picture. So the light curve on the left changes the overall brightness and contrast. The red curve tones the picture either towards right, or its opposite of red, which is turquoise. The same goes for other color curves. The green curve tones the picture towards green or red. The blue curves tones the picture to like blue or its opposite, yellow. So on the x-axis, you can see that the curves are divided into 4 sections: the shadow, the darks, the lights, and the highlights. And you just basically just wiggle the curves up and down to adjust it. And the y-axis indicates the amount of light. The more on the bottom, you get less light. On the top, you get more light. So that's basically how it works. Here is, oh, could you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
Yes. So here are just an example of how RGB curves can adjust the lighting of your picture. The one on the left, which is the original photo, it lacks a lot of details and it's a bit hazy, and it definitely like needs more light on the model. But after the RGB curves editing, you can see that the photo is it's crispier, it's more contrasted, and there's just a lot more details than it used to be. But this is clearly not done. We only edited the RGB curves. There's a lot more that you can do to this picture. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll talk more about other factors when it comes to lighting editing, such as exposure, contrast, highlights, whites, shadows, and blacks. So exposure is generally the amount of light in your photo. It's really useful when it comes to fixing overexposed or underexposed photos. Contrast, it's just the difference between the light or the colors. In terms of highlights and shadows, highlight is useful to brighten up the image without pushing the exposure, while shadows boost like underexposed areas and bring structures to a hazy image. As you can see on the examples on the right, the picture above, it's a bit hazy, there's not much structure. As on the bottom, when I boost up the shadows and dark a bit more, and then I tone down the lights and the shadows, the lights and the whites. So the picture look more contrasted. It doesn't look like as hazy because the light source is on the back of the model. So it just look more structured. There's a lot more details. It's crispier. When it comes to whites and blacks, the whites brings up the dynamic range because it's just a pure white in a photo. If you put it up and down, it just means there's more whites or there's less whites, and it dedicates the absolute brightest value in the image. So for example, in the picture on the right, it would be like the sky where it's a little bit overexposed, but it creates a pretty good result. So the RGB curves that I just talked about and those other factors, they both work when it comes to adjusting lights in the photo, but they give different results. So when it comes to those highlights and shadows, the adjustment is more targeted to the part of the image. So if you only adjust highlight, there's minimal impact on the shadow and vice versa. But if you use curves, you can get more control over the overall contrast, which is the difference between the light and the dark areas. With curves, you can get a much punchier image with like greater details over the entire dynamic range than you just use basically whites and blacks. So I think there's a big difference there. And then if we can go to the next slide, and then you can see that the original photo clearly doesn't have enough light on the bottom, whereas after you edit the picture, there's more details shown, like from the bottom of, you can see the grass, you can see the colors, it's more balanced in terms of the lights and everything. Okay, and that's everything I want to talk about when it comes to light editing. Now, I think Jimbo will talk about colors, so I will hand that to him.
All right. Thanks, Wumi. Thank you for that crash course on all of these important terms. So yeah, we really hope that you have a basic understanding of what these terms mean, and it will be very helpful when we get to some of our strategies later on. There's another biggie when it comes to photo editing, which is color. Color is one of those terms that could be complicated. Everyone knows about colors, but like when it comes to editing, it could be challenging, right? For example, like when I first started learning about color editing, my mentor just straight jumped into like color theories, and I just got completely confused. For a lot of us who are not super professional photographers, for those of us who just want to edit our photos to make them look better on our social media or use them for other occasions, it might be better to just follow some very simple, straightforward tips. So for example, when it comes to photo editing, I would say there are like two approaches that you could do. If you don't want to use the RPG curve, like what we just explained, you can sort of do something uniformly at the beginning, which is like very straightforward. But in order to do that, you need to understand two terms first, and you need to know the difference between the two terms, which is saturation and vibrance. So saturation is the intensity and purity of a color. The higher your saturation is, I don't want to say brighter, but definitely from a visual perspective. It definitely, if you have high saturation of your colors, it looks brighter, it looks bold, it just looks more saturated. How about that? Let's just call it that. And when it comes to vibrance, vibrance is not that different compared to saturation. It's essentially the same thing, and but it only applies muted colors. It's a function that's embedded in a lot of mainstream editing softwares like Photoshop or Lightroom. It's a very useful color editing tool. Like I said, because it only applies to muted colors, it becomes very helpful when you're trying to avoid changing a person's skin tone too much while making changes to saturation of the surrounding environment. So like you can see the comparison of the two pictures at the bottom of your screen there. So you can see what's going to happen if you change saturation versus changing vibrance. Sometimes if you just change your saturation too much, the skin tone of the whatever the person in that photo will look a little bit creepy, right? It will change the skin tone to orange, and it doesn't look great. So if that's the case, if you still want to edit all of your colors at once, maybe think of using vibrance instead of saturation next time. And other than the uniform approach, you can also do something called a pick and choose approach. By the way, this is not professional terms. These are just terms that I made up to help you, understand my own process. I normally edit my photos this way, pick and choose. It's pretty straightforward. You can just pick to mute certain colors and only focus on specific color tones in localized areas in your photo to achieve your artistic objective, right? So for example, on the left here, it's I took this photo at like 6 p.m. on a not 6 p.m. 5 p.m. something on a winter day. It's very dark outside, and my white balance was definitely off, and so that all the ice looks kind of dirty. But I mean, some people like that feel, right? So you could stick with it, but I like my color. I like the color of my picture to be a little bit brighter, to be a little bit more bold. So I picked, the orange color and the red color and really just, really just went hard at it, and you can see the result afterwards. And then also on the right here, this is a picture of, a little girl walking downstairs. I just wanted to make her stand out, so I muted all the other colors. I muted, the yellow, the green, everything. And I only left the color of her skirt and her shirt in place, and this is sort of like the result that you can kind of achieve with this pick and choose approach, and you can do that in Lightroom, and we can maybe demonstrate a little bit about how you can do that later on. So that's color, and now I'm gonna transfer back to Wumi, and she's gonna kind of summarize everything and talk a little bit more about details and effects.
Yeah, thank you, Jimbo. So when it comes to details and effects, in terms of details, there's just two general forms, which are sharpening and noise reduction. Sharpening generally just makes the picture more crispy. Like you have a crispier line between each objects, and it just makes the picture look crispier, looks more, there's more texture. And when it comes to noise reduction, noise are those grainy little sparkles that you can see in your photos when the photo is captured at a high ISO or in a dark environment, or the ones that are just really, really underexposed. But you normally want to deal with noise reduction after you set the light and color right, because those adjustments sometimes brings out noise, or like they bring down the noise a bit more. So you want to do that after you already set the light and the color right. And you can zoom in and out of the picture to see the difference noise reduction and sharpening gives to a picture. And next we have effects, which are, there's texture and clarity, which they're pretty self-explanatory. You just boost up the texture or clarity of the image. And there's also dehaze, vignette, and grain. And they generally add characteristics to a picture. So if you see the example on the right, I added dehaze and grain to the picture so that it looks a bit more, it has its own characteristic. It's not just, it looks a bit more like you took it on the film camera. There's more characteristic, there's more details. And yeah, I really like that picture. Anyways, now I think Jimbo will like touch on cropping and other tips that you can do when it comes to cropping. So please
Yep,
go ahead.
yep.
Yep.
Thanks, Lily. So when it comes to cropping, so if you've been to some of our earlier workshops, you've definitely heard this term, which is called, rule of thirds. And I really hope you know what it is by now, or if you have done photography in the past, you've definitely heard of this term before. And what rule of thirds means is basically, you divide your photo frame in by 3x3 grid lines, and then you've got your line of interest and you've got your lines of focus, and then you put the focus of your picture or the subject of your photo along either one of those grid lines or one of those like interest point, right? Focal point. So as you can see here, those are like two photos that I've took in the past, and you can sort of see how rule of thirds are being applied to these photos. Uh, and I'd just like to demonstrate a little bit about, or let me say, I'd just like to emphasize the importance of, practice and going through your pictures. So, a lot of my photos were like, kind of like that, after I, took them. A lot of them were not really that great, especially when it comes to, landscape shots or urban shots. They're not great to begin with. So, like, if you got a picture like this, this was taken at like 9 p.m. or something from City Hall. It's pitch dark, and it seems like there's not a lot going on. But if you just look closer, you can see like there's a little bit of contrast, right, between the people that are leaning on the handrails and the walls behind them. There's a little bit of contrast going on, and maybe there's something that could be done with it, right? And then what you do, you can crop it, right? You crop it like this. You do some color editing. You change the saturation a little bit. You change the contrast a little bit. You bring up the exposure a little bit, and then you get a photos like this. It's not like it's definitely like not as decent as it could be, but it's not like it's not terrible. So yeah, so that's like the process that you can definitely apply to your photo editing. And rule of thirds doesn't just apply to landscape or urban shots. You can apply that to event photographies or portrait photographies as well. And we're gonna have more examples later on to demonstrate that as well. And another technique, it's really self-explanatory, centering. Just put the subject at the center of your frame. You can do that with portraits. You can do that with landscape shots, urban photography shots, anything you want. And yeah, and then Wumi, would you like to talk a little bit more about detail polishing?
Yeah, thank you. So after you're done with all the steps we just mentioned, like color, light, and details and stuff, you should end up with a pretty nice photo. But sometimes you may need an additional step, which is detail polishing and retouching, especially when it comes to photos when you have like unwanted items or pedestrians in your background, or you want to remove like pimples or red veins in the person's eye. There's a really useful tool in like Photoshop or some apps on your phone that can help remove like just unwanted items in your picture. Like the photo on the right, the top one is after all the above mentioned editing. It looks pretty nice, but I just don't like how like the person in the background like it doesn't fit with the background. So I got rid of them, and the picture looked much cleaner and more focused on the model. So I think it just cleans up the picture really nice. And some other times when you have a photo that shows person's face, their eyes, it's really important to make the eyes pop because they're the sort of the key feature of your portrait. So you can do that by making sure the eye whites are really white and the eyes are in focus, the pupils are deep, and sometimes you can get rid of the red veins in the eye just to make your eyes look cleaner, look better, and look more focused. And lastly, sometimes maybe you can add a little bit of filters just to give it more characteristics. My suggestion is never to put the intensity of the filter to 100%. Sometimes like 20 to 30%, it's a good range for photos that you've already edited, so it doesn't look like too much in terms of the lighting and the color and everything. So that's it when it comes to basic photo editings. And now we want to talk more about our workflows, like our preparation process, the benefits of having your own workflow, as well as our editing routine. So Jimbo will talk first in this section. So go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Wumi. So first of all, I'd like to just clarify some things. Like, even though we said we're going to talk about a lot of our processes and our workflows, we're still going to talk a lot more about some of the specific terms later on because they're just like too important for, especially for event photography and portrait photography. So I apologize, if the slides from now on look a little bit more disorganized. But I really hope that I really think that you will benefit from all the information that we're gonna explain later on. So why do we want to talk about pre-shooting preparation in a post-editing workshop? Like, what's the connection here? Well, first of all, I think I'd just like to emphasize that post-editing cannot fix everything. If you have a bad photo to begin with, you're gonna have a bad photo after you edit them. Like, if you have a blurry photo, no matter how hard you try to fix it, it's gonna stay blurry. I guarantee. There's no, it just cannot be saved. Um, yeah, so it's always good to be prepared before a shoot, and in order to do that, you basically, you can sort of follow like a checklist when you need to do any photography for either a client or a friend. So first of all, is to figure out like when this photo shoot is gonna happen. Do you have any scheduling conflicts? What the lighting condition is going to be? Is that in the morning or is that in the afternoon? Is there going to be sun outside? That kind of thing. And then you got to figure out, where the shoot is, right? Is it going to be indoors or is it going to be outdoors? Is there going to be like strong indoor lighting, incandescent bulbs, or is there going to be natural lighting? Where's the venue? How's the setup? That kind of thing. Or how far is the venue, like, because sometimes when it comes to event photography, you need to bring soft boxes, flashes, and on top of that your own camera. I think if you don't have a car, it might be a problem, right? So you got to figure that out first, and then who you're working for. um, are they on top of everything? What are their expectations? Do they have any additional requirements? And finally, what they're expecting from you, what the subject of your photography is. Is this like is this like wedding photography for all of their family members, or is this something that they're going to use on their website? Figure out what your photos are going to be used for, and then that will determine your post editing strategy. For example, if you're just doing a favor for a friend, she or he just wants to post something new on their Instagram, I might not even do any post editing. I might even just send them the raw files and just like, hey, you play with it, you do whatever you want. But if it's a graduation party photo or convocation, yeah, you gotta be a bit more careful, right? So that's the pre-shooting preparation process for me as an event photographer when I go out and do these gigs. And like I said earlier, slides from now on might be a little bit disorganized, but you will see why at the end. I guarantee you. So part of the preparation process, like I said, it's about figuring out the lighting condition of your venue. Lighting is extremely important for event photography. And when it comes to lighting, one of the most commonly used system to provide lighting when there's not enough natural light is on-camera flash. So as you can see here, there are different kinds of on-camera flashes there, and the reason why they're so commonly used is that first of all they're fairly cheap. You can you can get a fairly outdated cheap flash for $100, $200 or something online. Or if you want to buy some of the good quality flashes like the Gold Docs ones, 300, $400, $500 will get you a fairly decent one. They're very versatile. They can do all kinds of gigs, but you can do all kinds of things with it. And it's light to carry. It's not one of those heavy equipment that you need to drag along, you know, all the time. You can just put it in your pocket. And then batteries are not that heavy. Usually they're lithium-ion batteries, rechargeable. You don't. You need if you got you get two batteries. You're good for the night, and you don't have to bring charging cables or anything like that. So those are the pros. Why it is so popular, but there are obviously also cons when it comes to on-camera flash. So first of all, if you don't use it properly, or sometimes due to constraints, it can create very harsh shadow on people's faces. So for example, as you can see on the picture, in the picture on the right here, I really, I really have no choice but to point my flash at these people. Um, and clearly you can see the shadow behind every person is super harsh, and then the shadow below everybody's chin is just it's just not great. But there's nothing I could do in that setting. There's no I'll explain why I didn't have any choices later on. And then if not used properly, your on-camera flash can get overheated pretty quickly, which can lead to permanent damage. Like your flash can some of the older generation flashes could literally explode. Like you can literally hear the and then the flash just it will just be dead on the spot. But some of the newer generation flashes are better, especially for Gold Docs. Like some of the recharging cycle for some of the Gold Docs flashes are like a second or less than a second. And in those situations, you never really need to worry about overheating. Uh, so yeah, pay attention to that. Pay attention to the recharging cycle of your flash, and make sure you get good quality flashes. And yeah, so there are solutions to some of these problems, right? One solution is you can ditch, your on-camera flash system altogether and go to an off-camera flash system, which can solve some of these problems. For example, some of the off-camera flash systems, like you can get a pocket light. I don't know why it's called pocket light, but this is what it is. Usually it's like 2 or 3 times more powerful than your on-camera flash. For example, if you put this thing in a conference room and you just point the flash right against the ceiling and you fire it up, it can light up the whole room. So it's very useful. Or you can get some soft boxes, and this can help you diffuse light so that you don't have the harsh lighting. And some of the on-camera flashes can be converted to off-camera flash systems. Like you just need a trigger. You need a trigger on your camera, and then you put your on-camera flash somewhere else, and then they can be synced together. You can do something like that too. Or you can get some LED panels. There's some pretty good LED panels that you can use now that can have their temperature adjusted. Like it's the problem with LED is that usually it's very cold. The color is very cold, but there are panels that can allow you to change the temperature uh, right now. And but okay, so I've used all of these systems before for different kinds of gigs, but every one of them has its own problems as well. Unfortunately, we can't cover all of them today due to time constraints. So today we're purely just going to focus on camera flash. That's what most photographers will use. Um, it's not like everyone will really get into the territory of using soft boxes all day. That kind. That's a little bit hardcore. But certainly, if you have questions or if you're more interested later on, we have a Q&A session later, and we can discuss them there. So here's a question. So what's the best way to use an on-camera flash? Right? Well, the answer is you can get a diffuser. As you can see, there are different kinds of diffusers that you can get. Some of them look really, really fancy, and if you have one of these things on your camera, right, and you walk into a venue, it's very people look at you thinking that, wow, you must really know your stuff, and it's quite intimidating. That's sometimes, but they don't really work that well in most situations. Like they look really fancy, but in terms of what they can really do, I have my doubts. So the best way to solve some of the problems that we mentioned earlier is to find a natural diffusion plane in your room, like a low ceiling or a nearby white wall, and make your light bounce. So the way you can do that is that, for example, I've got two pictures here that demonstrate how you could do that. The purpose here is basically the problem is you have harsh lighting, right? To solve it, you would have to try to mimic natural lighting by diffusing the light. And this is how you can do it. So, for example, I've got some example pictures here. These are not, as you can see, lighting is really, really soft in these pictures. And you can even see, like, for example, even like on the picture on the left here, in the picture on the left here, the room is also kind of, well lit. And that was just from an on-camera flash. An on-camera flash sometimes is powerful enough to allow you to do these kinds of things. And you don't see hard. There is shadow below people's chins, but it's not harsh. It's fairly soft, and you don't see any reflection spots, light spots on the glass, right? That's like, to me, when I see those light spots on glasses, it just like it just turn me off like immediately. So you can see by diffusing your lights smartly, you can do things like that. And then in the picture on the right here, you can see also the light is fairly soft. And what I did there was, there's a ceiling. The ceiling is fairly low in that venue, so I just point my on-camera flash directly to the ceiling. I turn up its power to maximum, and I just fire it up, and this is the kind of picture that you could get. Yeah, and then another tip, I guess, about event photography when you're shooting your photo, in order to get a good photo to begin with, is make sure that you shoot from different angles. So this is like the conventional shooting angles that a lot of us do, right? When you see a person walking over, you just pull up your camera, click it. That's the picture that you're gonna get, right? I mean, the photos are not gonna be great, but it'll be okay, right? Whereas if you try something else, for example, if you shoot your picture from below, sometimes you can get different perspectives like this. One of the most useful shooting angle for me is probably the above angle. Uh, and you can see why. Like, for example, some of these photos, like when you see pictures like these online, maybe it's hard for you to think about, like, oh, like what did this photographer do? You don't really think about it, right? But what I did here was basically I was holding up my camera this high and then trying to get my shot from above. Because I mean, if you think about it, looking at this photo here, if I didn't do that, you're not going to be able to get all that layers of people behind. And you're not going to be able to get that backdrop, right? If you only stay at your eye level. There are more examples here. For example, there's another example. And then, it's very useful when it comes to taking group pictures or class photos. You always hear people complain about, oh, it's very hard to get everyone in the picture. Well, of course, if you only stay at your eye level, of course it's hard to get everyone into the frame. So why don't you get a chair, stand on top of that chair, and try to get everyone from above, right? And that way you can pretty much capture everybody's face. Yeah, so these are some of the tips that we just like to offer to help you get a good photo to begin with. And I think now Winnie is going to talk a little bit more about actual processes. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to first mention why like having a workflow is so important. So first of all, it increases your efficiency. Instead of like getting a picture and then you start like, oh, what should I do first? If you have your own workflow, you can just go for it. You don't have to think or like waste time on just like considering what should be the first step. And secondly, it gives you a really good consistency, especially when you have really similar photos. If for one photo you start with light first and another photo you start with color first, there's a really high chance that you will end up with two different edits, which is just not a good consistency. And lastly, it's good to develop a good habit, especially when you just started like photography or like editing. Um, just like we mentioned, I always do noise reduction after the light and color edits. That's a really good habit. Instead of like, if you don't have a good habit, you might end up with like spotty edits and everything. So if you go to the next slide, I will show you my edit process, my routine when it comes to editing. So when I have a raw photo, I first of all, I always identify the elements that needs to be adjusted. Like, is the white balance good? Is it too cold? Is it too warm? Is the photo like overexposed or underexposed? And then I would go to actual editing on Lightroom on my iPad or on my computer, and then I would do the lighting, colors, and details. Sometimes I always go with color, and then no, I always go with lighting and color, and then details and cropping. But sometimes if the photo is like really not straightened at all, I will tend to fix that first. But normally I just go light, color, and then details. And then after that, I will go to retouching, just like I mentioned. I will clean the background. I'll make sure if there's eyes showing, I'll make sure that they pop. And then I will finalizing by going back to like colors and lighting just to make minor changes and make sure that I'm satisfied with my final product. And I actually have an example. If you go to the next slide, so how I will show an example of how I turned the original photo like this on the left to my final product on the right. So first of all, we have to identify the problems in this picture. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so first of all, it's really clear that the photo does not have enough light, especially on the model, but it's not underexposed because you can see on the left in the background, there's a ton of light there. It's just because the light source is behind the model, so it's normal that we don't get a lot of light on the model itself, but it's fixable. It's not a big problem. We can do that just by like playing with the RGB curves. And also the picture look hazy, it's not straightened, it lacks like color and vibrance, and also the skin tone looks a little bit off to me. So if we go to the next slide, I actually prepared a video of me trying to edit this picture. So if we can go to the next slide. Yes, and there's a video's not there. Okay, there's a video of me editing this photo on Lightroom with my iPad because I can do it with my Apple Pencil. It's really easy and useful. So first of all, I just play with the light curve, and by creating a S shape, I make the photo more contrasted. There's more highlight and there's more highlight, and the dark places are darker as well. That increase the contrast. And then I play with the red curve, green curves, and blue curves. You can see that I make really, really minor changes because they tend to they change the tone of the picture a lot. So just like minor changes, it's good enough. So now you can see there's already a big difference. There's like a lot more light on the model, and it looks more balanced between the background and the model itself. And then I go to like the other elements such as exposure and contrast. I'm pretty comfortable with the exposure and contrast here, so I didn't change them much, just like a tiny bit edits, but that doesn't really matter. But then the whites and the blacks are the ones that I really focused here because I feel like there's too much light in the background. So I toned down the whites a little bit, and then I added a bit more blacks and shadows to give details on the model itself. And then I moved on to colors. I changed the tone a bit because I changed the tint a little bit because I feel like the picture looked a bit greenish. So by adding a little bit of purple, you contrast the green so it doesn't look greenish anymore. And then I went to individual colors. I just edited a bit, especially removing like green and purple, those colors that I don't really want to be in this picture. So the photo looks cleaner. There's more white the white looks more white. It just looked cleaner that way. And then I brought up the saturation of blue a bit because I like the color of the jeans and how there's like the reflection of the sky in the background. And then I move on to details. I just cranked up the sharpening and a little bit of noise reduction, just to make sure the picture has good details and look nice. And I went to effects. I was, oh, do I add grain? Nope. So I canceled the grain. And this is me trying to finalize just by making some minor changes in lighting. And then I went to cropping and rotating just to make sure the picture is straightened, like it's nice and centered. And then I would just like be like, oh, is this good? Nope. Okay, now it's good. Now you can see the difference of the before and after. I myself, I think it's a really big difference and I like how it turned out. So this is how I would normally just edit any pictures that I have. So that's it. That's all I have for when it comes to workflows. So if we can go to the next slide, we're gonna talk about the last topic. The last topic of this workshop, which is tips. I have 2 tips for you guys. So first of all, I would like to share that the first tips, which is the temperature of the photo, is really important. To me, I feel like it affects the emotion and the vibe of the photos. Like cold colors give me a more urban, a cool vibe, whereas warm colors are more natural, they're more cozy, and it makes me feel comfortable. So on the examples on the right, the upper photo, it's like a colder temperature because it's urban, and it just makes I just like it because it looks urban, it looks cooler, it looks more refreshing. Whereas on the bottom, the photo was taken in autumn, so I want a warmer color to make it look natural, to make it look cozy, because it's fall. I like all the warm colors of the leaves and my sweater and the lighting. Anyways, so I think it makes a big difference. And then lastly, I think by increasing the luminance in orange color, you can get a better skin tones. So if you're not satisfied with the skin tone of your model, sometimes bring up the luminance and bring down the saturation a little bit. It gives you a really nice skin tone. So, and then that's all I have when it comes to editing tips. I think Jimbo has a few more tips that he wants to share, so I will pass that to him.
Yeah, of course. Um, so I do like to share some tips on the general process when it comes to event photography editing. Um, I think when it comes to editing batches of photos, I think one of the best things to keep in mind is that you don't try to do everything at the same time. Try to focus on one thing at a time. When I say batch editing, I'm talking about having to go through 500 photos, 700 photos at once, which could be very common. Like for example, like if you're hired to take pictures at a dinner dance, well that's what you're gonna get. You can get 1,000 photos at the end of the night. Or if you go to like a networking session and you're asked to take photos, you can get 300 photos at the end of the day, and you will have to go through all of them. What are you gonna do? Twist every single picture? Um, you could, and it's gonna take you a lot of time. And so if you want to be efficient, you need to adopt a process and think of it as creating a assembly line approach to photo editing, right? Just do one thing at a time, and then that will really speed you up. So first of all, what you want to do is you want to get rid of the bad photos first. There are just some photos that are not going to be savable, right? If you have a lot of blurry photos, you have some very, very overly exposed photos, maybe you should get rid of them. They're not worth your time. Um, yeah. So get rid of those photos. And then normally, for example, if I have 2,000 photos to edit, at the end of the day, if I go through this pre-selection process first, I might be down to 1,000 photos, or 1,300 photos, that kind of thing. There are also going to be duplicated shots. Get rid of those as well. No need to send 2 pictures that are similar or identical, right? The second step, I normally would crop my photos first. Apply whatever principles that you've learned or things that you want to do to your photos, put them into Lightroom, crop them, export them, and import them back to Lightroom, and then just focus on all the other details like color and stuff like that. And if you think that presets are going to be helpful, for example, if most of your photos are taken within the same setting, maybe a preset would be beneficial, so that you don't have to do edits to every single picture. And we can demonstrate a little bit of how you can make a simple preset to begin with later on at the end of this slide. And once you apply your presets to fix your colors and things like that, do some detailed touch-ups, like what Wumi said, right? If there are details that upset you in the photo, this is the time to fix them. You still have to go through every single photo at the end of the day if you want to make them, perfect or up to your own standard. And then finally, just before you send them out, try to get some feedback from people. For example, I would always, send 2 or 3 pictures to, my friends or event organizers that hired me for the gig, and just be like, hey, just update. This is the kind of photo that you're gonna get. Like, does it look okay? If there's something that's off, let me know, and I can fix it right now. It's always a good practice to do that before you hand over all of your material. And now I would just like to stop sharing my slides. And fine, nice. And then I'm just gonna demonstrate a little bit of how you could make a preset on your own, so that you don't have to spend a lot of money to buy these kinds of things online. So I'm just gonna share my screen again. All right, here we go. Can you guys see my screen? Can everyone see it?
It's loading right now. Oh, it's good. I can see it now.
Good. Okay. So this is Lightroom. For those of you who've never seen it before. And by the way, I would just like to demonstrate what I mean when it comes to having hundreds of photos that I have to go through. So this is kind of like, the workflow, the workload. You've got like 500 photos that you have to go through, and it will be a pain in the ass if you have to, do every single one separately. So better to adopt a strategy in this case. So let's see, I'm just gonna pick a random photo. Okay, let's see, I'm just gonna pick this one, and I'm gonna use this photo to create a preset. So when you have a photo like this, right? And then when you are under the develop tab, you can see there's on the left here, you have presets. And what I'm gonna do is that, okay, I'm just gonna, let me do some changes to this photo first. Okay, I'm gonna make some really bad edits at this point, just to make a point, but definitely don't do these kinds of things when you're making your own preset. Let's say I just want more light. I just want this photo to be overly exposed, and I want really high contrast like this, right? And I like my color. I like my photo to be warm, so I'm just gonna really crank it up. Like I said, it's a really bad edit. Don't do that, but I'm just doing it for the purpose of demonstration. So now you say, okay, this is a perfect photo. I really like all the edits that I made, and I would like to preserve it for all of the other photos that I'm going to edit. What you could do is you can go to the preset tab over here, click the plus sign, create a preset, make sure you select everything so that the preset that you create captures all the edits that you're making. You can name them. I'm just gonna name as something like this, and then you can create a group, right? I'm just gonna call it, let's say, workshop 4, and then I just click create, and then it should pop up very soon. Oh, here we go. So you can see here, this is a preset now. So if I go to another photo like this one, oh, maybe this one. And then I say, okay, I want to apply the preset to this photo that I just made, right? You just click that, and then all the changes will be applied to this photo. And you can do that. And there are ways that you can apply the preset to batches with photos as well. Yeah, so this is basically the process of creating a preset. And I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen and then go back to our slides. We don't have a lot of slides left, so don't worry, guys. We will be done very soon. Okay, here we go. Oops. Yep. So this is pretty much my tip on post editing when it comes to event photography. And like I said, we're pretty much at the end of our workshop. And if you have any questions, this is the time to ask. I know we cranked a lot of materials into this workshop. I hope you didn't get lost or confused. But yeah, if you have any questions, let us know, either in the chat or you can just turn on your mic and just talk to us.